I'd like to encourage you to be turning with me tonight to Revelation chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20. We're going to be looking at the first few verses of this chapter because they're very important when we think about the seven churches of Asia and what they had undergone. And in reality, in some semblance of the way things are in our world today. We note here many centuries, the 20th chapter of Revelation has been used as a basis for various theologies about a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. And that is noted as premillennialism. Now, for those that are involved and believe in all of that stuff, I encourage you to go back and to go through the videos that we have on our Facebook page or YouTube or X that denotes the study of eschatology, because we've dealt with that. And if you really look at the millennial ideologies, and there's more than just premillennialism, most of the time those who promote those things also promote the idea of them receiving sordid gain. So what we want to do is not worry about all of those things or what somebody said, but we want to actually see what the passage is telling us. And what we actually see is the seven parts in these passages, and it begins with the phrase, "when I saw," which describes the aftermath of the defeat of the beast and the false prophet that was embodied in the old Roman Empire. It's not talking about something in the future. It's talking about that which has already happened. And as Caesar and his allies in the world had been predicted for defeat, the devil was losing his closest ally in the fight against the faith. Now, think about this just a bit. The church at the time period that this is written was predominantly there in the Mediterranean area, pretty much. After this, it had expanded all the way to India, all the way into Europe. But it was consolidated in that area. And Rome had effect to all of that area also. That was the kingdom of Rome. That was what Rome had. So Satan used Rome as the tempter. And the preserved saints are the main subject here in this chapter, that look, you're going to overcome. And when you do, when Rome falls, Satan is going to be bound. And we'll get into that as we go along tonight. Chapter 20 is one of the most hotly debated chapters in the Bible, as I've already talked about. The false doctrine of premillennialism or any amillennialism, there's a lot of them. They use this chapter to base their ideologies on. And they take it completely out of context. Now, we look at some of the consequences of premillennialism during our introductory lessons. We won't repeat them here. And again, let me reiterate, you can go back and watch all those videos that we did on eschatology, which eschatology means a study of end times. So you can go back and you can look at all of those things. Now, we should pause to consider one important point. It does make a difference what we believe about premillennialism and all of those things, because it's making people money and it's leading a multitude astray. The false premillennial doctrine has consequences that run counter to the very heart of the gospel. And when you look at all of premillennialism and you go back to our study, premillennialism belittles the church. It belittles the significance of Christ's perfect sacrifice. And at the heart of premillennialism is the notion that Christ's church was a mistake because Jesus failed to accomplish what he came to do, and that Jesus was a failure. And again, let me encourage you to go back and to look at all of those things we've already studied. Now, here are some of the things that we should keep in mind as we begin our study of chapter 20 and 21. The book of Revelation is focused on two primary events, which are really just two sides of the same coin: the judgment of Rome and the victory of the church. Chapter 20 deals with the first two events, while chapter 21 will deal with the second. And it is a reality. Chapters 20 through 22 are the climax of the book. We have carefully considered the context in our understanding of the first 19 chapters, so let's don't disregard that. Let's not say, well, we come up to this point, now we're looking in the future. No, we're still talking about the same thing, the seven churches of Asia, what they're going through, the difficulties, but also how it's going to relate down through time. And I think that's something that's important, especially in these first three verses that we'll look at tonight. Our goal is to find an explanation that fits the historical context of the book, that agrees with the time frame of the book, and that would have had a meaning to the original readers, that was relevant to their current crisis, and that's what we have said here. One more reminder, similarity of language does not mean identifying of subject. In essence, we're going to see images that could be used to describe the final judgment or the end time. The same is, images have been used elsewhere in the Bible to describe other past judgments by God and not the final judgment or the end times. There's a key thing here. When you're studying, you have to keep things within the context of where they are written, whether it's Old Testament or New Testament. Now, judgments in the Bible are genuinely described using a similar symbols, and so we cannot determine which judgment is being discussed by looking at those symbols alone. Again, just like I said, you got to study the context, the time frame of what's going on. You can't just pick and choose out what you so desire. So let's look beginning here in Revelation chapter 20 and verse 1. It says, "Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding the key of the abyss and a great chain in his hand. And he said, 'Lay hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he threw him into the abyss, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he would not deceive the nations any longer, until 1,000 years were complete. After these things he must be released for a short time.'" Now, those three verses have so much that is applicable to the time and applicable throughout history, even before the time that Jesus died on the cross, even in the Old Testament time. The angel who appears here in this verse 1 is not Jesus, but a ministering servant. one who holds the key to the abyss, the bottomless pit, and a strong chain with which to bind Satan. The angel, Angelios, is a messenger of God, is one who is doing God's bidding. And again, go back and watch all the videos that we did and talked about angels and demons. They're all out there also. So Satan here is caught by the angel, bound for 1,000 years, representing a complete but undetermined period in which he can operate only within the limits of his perimeter, which Christians and infidels enter at their own risk. Perimeter. I'll get it right here in a moment. Satan was pretty much had free reign as long as he did it as God would allow. And we go back to the Old Testament, and we know that Satan goes to God and asks him, says, what about your servant Job? Go study that. Satan had parameters. Remember, Satan is a fallen angel. Satan is in that angelic being situation. So he's caught by this angel. He's going to be bound for 1,000 years. Now, during the symbological long period, Satan will be held in the abyss, unable to deceive the nations, as he had during Caesar's slavery to him. That's a key deal there in verse 3. He cannot deceive the nations. Prior to this, if you had a nation, Satan could deceive it. Rome was a nation. Satan could deceive it. Well, that's going to all be cast into the abyss. He's not going to be able to do that any longer. Now, it talks about the 1,000-year moment of victory, and that symbolizes the beginning of the reign of the Emperor Constantine, who ended the persecution and legalized Christianity. Now, we'll hit this again in a minute, but Rome fell, and the Roman Catholic Church became what Rome was, and is still today. It is not a nation, but it is an ideological group of individuals promoting their militancy. And if you don't believe they're not militant, go back and look at history. Go back and look at history. In verse 1, we see an angel from heaven comes down with the key of the bottomless pit. We see two important things in this description. First, that Satan was defeated. And also, this scene is being observed from where? Earth. John's in Patmos. In verse 2, it pictures the defeat by showing Satan being bound for 1,000 years. That is not a literal 1,000 years. Because if that was so, and he was bound in about 90 AD, he'd already be loose. And he would be ruling and using nations against the church. But it's not happening. Nations, from the time of this, no nation that I know of through history has ever been solidified enough to go against the body of Christ, the church. But a multiplicity of religious ideologies have and are currently doing so. When we think about the 1,000 years, it is that apocalyptic Hebraic numerology that brings together the idea of completeness. In essence, When it's complete, it will be finished. Look right here. If the number 10 represents completeness, then the number 1,000 represents completeness. So yes, when God decides that Jesus is coming back to this world, it'll be complete. But Satan is limited. He is bound currently that he cannot take these nations to attack Christianity. Now, again, this has been used symbolically outside of the apocalyptic book. In Psalm 50, verse 10, it tells us that God owns cattle on 1,000 hills, which means that his ownership is complete. Deuteronomy 7:9 tells us that God keeps his covenant to 1,000 generations, which means that his faithfulness is complete. Satan is bound for 1,000 years, which means his defeat is complete. And he's bound. He's limited in what he can do. So being bound for 1,000 years means that with regard to Rome, Satan has been completely bound, completely defeated. There is no parole regarding Rome. Satan is not going to be released for good behavior with regard to Rome. It's set, a complete time. And that time is completed when God decides that time is completed. After the 1,000 years, Satan will be released for a short time. So what does this mean? Well, the first thing it means is that the 1,000-year binding could not be describing Satan's defeat at the end of the world. He's going to be released. Because when that defeat happens, Satan is not going to be released. Satan is bound. Satan is going to be cast into the abyss with his minion and all of those who have stood with him. All of his minion, his angels and his minion. Now, it notes here in verse 3. Let me look right here right quick. The last part of verse 3. It says, after these things, he must be released for a short time. Now, just as the 1,000 years refers to a state of affairs rather than to a period of time, so does this short time, referring to the state of affairs rather than to a period of time. Now, although Satan has been defeated with regard to Rome, the church, we have to wonder if Satan might not attack again later and perhaps be more successful this time. Well, God assures them in this chapter that although Satan will attack again, Satan will never be able to defeat the church. The war was won on the cross, but we have to keep the battle up for souls. And it's the souls that are being led astray that is the situation today. He cannot take a nation, come against the church. But all the religious ideologies from this time forward, Satan uses to take people away from God. And it's evident throughout our world that there are that multiplicity of religious ideologies that are leading people away from God. Now, God will continue to protect the church in the future, just as he protected it from Rome. We're not alone out here. We've talked about this several times. Now, the short term refers to Satan's inability to defeat the church now or ever. There's always going to be that remnant. I thought it was interesting. I was listening to an individual in some of the most ungodly places in our world that has the most satanic or I'm going to use the word satanic ideologies, there's still remnants in those places. Christians. May not be many, but there's always that few. You know, Satan did his worst. All that he could through Rome, and he failed. Although Satan will gather his strength and try again, his future attacks will be insignificant compared to what he did and tried to do through Rome. But he's still out there. He's out there like a roaring lion, seeking those in whom he can devour, according to Peter. Thus, they are depicted as lasting only a little while. And that is, again, that time period that it lasts. By saying Satan will return for only a short time, God is saying that Satan's future attacks are nothing to worry about. Well, that is true when we think about the church in its totality. But Satan had at his disposal an evil, bloodthirsty empire that ruled the world, and yet he was not able to defeat the church in its infancy with such a weapon. He won't defeat the church. But I think about those precious souls that he's taking away from God through these apostate ideologies, ungodly, satanic things going on. In our it asks the question, is our modern age somewhere in the book of Revelation? Yeah, that's short time. We're in the short time. That promise that Satan will not defeat the eternal kingdom of Christ is just as much a promise for us as it is for those in the first century. We're living in that time. You know, somebody come along and said to me, what about the end times? I said, what about them? Well, what do you think's going to happen? I said, look around. It's happening. We're in the end times. We've been in the end times since Jesus died on the cross. Crazy reality, but it's what it is. Now, let me back up just a bit. In verse 3, it talks about him not being able to utilize nations. Now, if you go back to the Old Testament, Satan utilized nations to war against Israel. That was the reality. Jesus dies on the cross. Satan is bound. He cannot use the nations like Rome. In other words, let's say, for instance, and you think of a name of a nation. Because if I pick out one nation and use that as an example, I get in trouble. But you pick it out. That nation as a nation cannot come against the church. It's not going to happen. But think about how many world religions there are. Think about how powerful these ideologies are and how militant they have been throughout history. And again, if you go back and you study the history of nations and you look at all of these things and what's going on and what's happened in these specific situations, Satan is busy. He's using these false ideologies to attack the church. And if you really think about it, even some who say, well, we're Christians, he uses them to attack the true church. And that's been happening since this time period. Let's quickly look at verse 4. Then I saw the thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was given to them. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony of Jesus, and because of the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received the mark on their foreheads and on their hand. And they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Again, a totality. After the devil is restrained, John sees, now remember this is a vision, John sees the souls of the martyrs and those who had managed to live faithfully on the earth as they sat upon those thrones. The rest of the dead, they're the wicked servants of the devil. Though through their allegiance to Rome, they have no part in that victory. The first resurrection is not a bodily raising, but a resurrection of the cause of Christ through the saints and the martyrs' vindication over Rome. That's what he's talking about here. It is a renewed cause of Christ. Things are changing. In verse 4, it describes a future situation or past situation. Well, look at who's assembled here. We've seen the same cast of characters before, the martyrs and the beast. If we are correct that this beast is Rome, then this chapter is talking about Rome. The entire book has been built toward the climax of these last 3 chapters. So who's on the throne? Well, Christians, the church. Jesus promised in chapter 2 and 3 that those who overcame would share his rule over the nations. And that's what we're seeing here. In addition to seeing the church as a whole, John also sees those individual Christians who were killed by Rome, the martyrs. They're noted here. And they were killed because they would not worship the beast. They wouldn't worship Rome. They wouldn't worship, that emperor worship falls into this that we've talked about so much. These martyrs, they live and reign with Christ for 1,000 years, totality of time, and they are like the 2 witnesses that we have seen earlier. They appear to have killed and defeated. They appear to have been killed and defeated by Rome, but they came to life. Rome is dealt with. Noting, is this resurrection literal or figurative? Our general rule with apocalyptic language is to understand language figuratively unless something forces us to determine it literally, and there is no reason to depart from that rule. In fact, the Bible includes many figurative resurrections. Daniel 12, verse 2, for example, is a figurative resurrection depicting the coming of the Messiah. The same figurative resurrection is mentioned in Luke 2:34 by Simon, Isaiah 26:19, Hosea 13:14, and there are other examples of that. So what does this particular resurrection depict? Well, it depicts the same thing as in the setting that was depicted in Ezekiel 37, where the same image was also used. In Ezekiel 37, Ezekiel saw a bodily resurrection occurred in a valley of dry bones. In verse 11 of that, God told him that the bones were the house of Israel, who had lost all of its hope. So I encourage you to go back and study that. That's kind of interesting, back in Ezekiel. In verse 12 of that passage, it says, therefore prophesy and say to them, thus says the Lord God, behold, I will open your graves and cause you to come up out of your graves, my people, and I will bring you into the land of Israel. And you will know that I am the Lord, and that I have opened your graves and caused you to come up out of your graves, my people. I put my spirit within you, and you will come to life, and I will place you on your own land. And you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken and done it, declared the Lord. So go back and do some study on that. So what happens after they come to life? Well, they reign with Christ. As Christians, we reign with Christ. We are in Abraham's bosom. It's going to be that complete time. It means that their restoration is completely complete. Their victory over Rome is just as complete as was Satan's defeat with regard to Rome. Those 2 events are 2 sides of the same coin. One is 1,000 years, and so must the other be. So when we think about the 1,000-year reign of Christ, we're talking about that completeness, that reign of Christ. There's no time limit. It is figurative. It is talking about the duration of Christ's reign, and that will be after he comes back. So we're going to stop right there tonight. I want you to think about the nation, and that no nations can come against the church. No ideology can destroy the church. But a multiplicity of precious souls can be led away from the church. In whatever way that might happen, because Satan is out there like a roaring lion, and he is devouring the multitude. We'll start there next Wednesday evening if the Lord wills.